Captain Jerry Hendrix, who is a military historian and strategist extraordinaire. He has authored all sorts of great content. He's got a great article that he co-wrote with Brent Sadler over at National Review called Restoring Our Maritime Strength, which we'll get to in just a minute. He, of course, has written the go-to manual for kind of the way forward for the United States Navy to provide and maintain a Navy. Welcome, Captain Hendrix. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning, Dwayne. I'm doing good, and I see that you've been up and around quite a while today.
Well, somebody's got to do it. When the host decides to take a powder for a week, somebody's got to actually get up and run this thing. The show doesn't run itself, actually. But you and I had a conversation on my Dwayne's World podcast about a week and a half ago, and I kind of want to extend that conversation and bring it more into real time. We've talked a lot about a lot of the other picks, DOJ nominations and things like that, but I want to go back to the DOD pick of Pete Hegseth, who was on the Hill talking to a lot of senators. The controversies are being ginned up about him and how much trouble he's going to be in. My spidey sense still tells me I think he's going to clear the confirmation hurdle. And you and I talked about Hegseth before. And since I think you and I talked, you actually went back and read his book, The War on Warriors. And look, I'm a layman. You're the guy that knows this business a lot better than I do. I'm just an outsider, a civilian. But what I think needs to happen with the Pentagon are three things. This is the three biggest priorities for whoever is the next secretary. One, you've got to excise all of the woke policy and the practitioners of woke policy. Number two, you've got to kind of restore the warrior ethos in the building. And with that, you kind of provide an incentive for recruitment again, and you get the military being cool again, getting back to doing what they should be doing. And three, you've got to realign the Pentagon's force structure, their posture, and the industrial base to meet not just current threats, but future threats. Is that a fair analysis of what the next secretary has to do?
I think you've pretty much summed it up, and I think in a very cogent way. It's a very complex entity. It's a mechanism, the Pentagon. Many moving parts and gears. But you're right. The Secretary of Defense has to kind of bring it all together in sort of problems that can be solved, baskets that can be attacked, rather than becoming overwhelmed by the complexity of the problem. You have to start with the first step and then figure out where the priorities are. And the thing is that the Hegseth pick really represents a policy statement on the part of President Trump. He very clearly had issues with the Pentagon in his first term. And so he's coming back with Hegseth, and he's sending a statement, which is that he wants to prioritize effectively the culture of the Pentagon. He wants to reinstate a leadership culture in the Pentagon, the concept of unity of command. The fact is there's been a common watch phrase with Democrat administrations that diversity is our strength, when in fact the military ethos has been, for quite frankly, centuries, that unity of command. There is a reason why we wear uniforms, why we all have the same strange short haircuts. We all are going to come together to forget essentially our individual identities to have a uniformed identity, a group identity, as we pursue and go on mission. And I think that that's what Hegseth gets at in his book. And by the way, he's written 3 books, co-authored with one, and then written 2 on his own. So I went out and got them so that I could get my mind around it. And I think that he's on to something, and I can see where Trump was going with this selection. Obviously, Hegseth has got a really strong background. I know there's a lot of people say, well, he doesn't have, the type of background that goes into be Secretary of Defense. Well, I'm not really sure what background they're talking about, because we've had a number of different resumes that have played into DOD. He is not going to be the youngest man to be Secretary of Defense. That was Don Rumsfeld back in '75.
Right. Right.
He's got experience. He's got 2 Bronze Stars and a combat infantryman's badge, which we all look at as sort of a real sign that he's had that experience. But he's moved on to have other experiences as a thinker and a writer. So I'm kind of looking. The one thing I think about this unity of command thing, and this versus this idea of diversity is our strength. Our national motto is e pluribus unum. Out of many, one, not
One,
out of
exactly.
many, many. And so I think that that's the ethos that they're seeking to bring to the Pentagon right now.
Jerry Hendrix, a good mutual friend of ours, Kurt Schlichter, filled in this chair on Tuesday. And when he was talking about the Hegseth pick and what has to happen at Pentagon, he used the expression that whoever the next secretary is, you can't really go into the building and manage it because it's really an unmanageable place. Whoever the next secretary has to go in has to take command of the place. Number one, do you agree with Kurt's assessment? And can you explain to people kind of what the difference is and how that would manifest itself?
So I think this is an excellent point, which is, other aspects of the government can be managed or administered, but the Pentagon is the leader of the military, which is a command climate and culture. We are here to command. We are to set orders. We are to take orders from the commander in chief, transmit them to the forces, and then move out with the nation's missions to provide for the common defense, to go to the preamble of the Constitution. And so you really have to institute that as a command culture over there. By the way, command comes with two different parts. One is absolute responsibility, but then authority to match with that. You have to have a balance between the responsibilities of command and the authorities that go with command. And I think that has been badly out of whack, not only over the last 4 years, but quite frankly, over the last one or two generations. Right now, going back to the end of the Cold War, we've lost a sense of that responsibility goes with it. This comes to one of the points that Brent and I made in our essay in National Review. One of the lead things that has to be done first is building the bench. Personnel is policy. So it's not just going to be Hegseth. Hegseth cannot come in, snap his fingers, and change everything. He's going to have to bring in a very strong team, both in the Office of Secretary of Defense, but then also in the services, service
The service
secretaries,
chiefs,
undersecretaries.
absolutely, the service chiefs are everything. They absolutely are,
Yeah,
especially SecNav. That's going to be the pick to watch, right? Because that's going to be the one that hinges how we look at future threats. Is who is going to be posturing what that part of the force is. We have to ramp up the Navy because if we don't, the oceans aren't getting any smaller, right? And the threats from hypersonics and all sorts of other toys that are out there, we have got to have a change of thinking for how we have projection at sea. And I can't think of a more important pick outside of DOD secretary than NAVSEC. Sec.
well, I agree with you. The Secretary of the Navy position is always strongly sought, because Secretary of Army commands an army. Secretary of the Air Force commands the Air Force, leads the Air Force. Secretary of the Navy commands a Navy, an Army in the sense of the Marine Corps, and an Air
Correct.
Force in the sense of naval aviation for both of the services. So you really have a very diverse, force that you have to. It's a very complex mechanism that you have to understand. Now, the thing about that is you also have to take care of that. So there's personnel issues. We have a rapidly aging fleet in the sense of our naval force structure. The average age of our ships across the entire 294 ships in the fleet is growing because of how long we've been building and how slow we've been replacing our older ships right now. And so you have to get at that. A lot of our ships need repair. 40% of our submarines, our fast attack nuclear powered submarines right now, are tied to the pier. They have lost their dive certifications and cannot get underway. We have to get at that problem because the submarines are the cutting edge of the force. And we have to figure out a way of getting the defense industrial base engaged in order to grow it. Brent and I set a goal of 333 ships by the end of the Trump administration. That's 4 years from now. And there's many ways of getting at that. We have to build more. We have to preserve that we have the ones that we have now a little bit longer. And we may have to go back to some of the ships that we've recently retired and bring them back out and refurbish them in order to do that. But we need those numbers because those numbers are what will establish conventional deterrence to keep the Chinese from moving aggressively, for instance, against Taiwan, or even our oldest treaty ally, the Philippines, who they're sort of much busting up and bruising right now in the South China Sea. So we need to have a fleet that's forward deployed and ready in order to do that.
We are talking about the article called Restoring Our Maritime Strength, which is in the December 24 print edition of National Review. We encourage you to pick it up. It's also online as well, written by Jerry Hendrix and Brent Sadler. Jerry, in our couple minutes left, trying to adapt the Pentagon to where we know it needs to go is like trying to take an aircraft carrier and making it do a U-turn. You can go hard left rudder as much as you want. It's going to take a while for that boat to finally catch and start to come around. So over the next 3 months, 6 months, assuming that Pete Hegseth gets in and the service chiefs that he wants gets in, what kind of metrics would you look to that would, in fact, real quick, what would you look to see if we're heading the right direction finally?
Well, I think that first of all, two things that we'd be looking for. One is the creation of what Brent and I call a Five Oceans Navy Act. This is a takeoff of actually the Two Ocean Navy Act that was passed in the late 1930s and 1940, where they actually began to purchase the ships in sort of massive block buy